you very much. So I don't know if what's worse, to be the last speaker before lunch or the first speaker after lunch, but I'm going to try to keep this pretty quick. I have no PowerPoint. We're just going to be talking. Of course, my name is Haya. I just want to let you know that I've been called a lot of different names, like Haya and Mr. El Nasser. And actually, I have a funny story. When I lived on Capitol Hill in the 80s in D.C., there was a congressman from Oklahoma who lived in my building. And when I introduced myself to him, he just looked at me very puzzled. "What's your name again?" And I said, "It's Haya." He goes, "Well, gosh, back home, we just call you Howdy." So that's the, so I'm used to it all. I'm fine with it. So I'm going to talk to you, and Mary obviously talked a little bit about my background, but I'm just going to put it in perspective. Before I joined the Census Bureau earlier this year, I was a journalist my entire career, but the key thing is that I was the chief demographics reporter for USA Today for almost 20 years. That meant covering 2 decennials and everything in between. And I could relate to what Andy said. I had a lot of people saying, "Well, what do you do all this time in between? You know, you just have a census." Obviously, we were very good at mining the data. I worked with a database editor. I was the writer and reporter. Came up with the story ideas off of the data, and reporting on it full time really helped me in being able to sort of pounce on the data when it was released, because I knew that something was going on the ground and I wanted to see if the numbers would reflect that. So we were very good at generating content, and of course we were especially focused on making sure we covered every state, because we were USA Today, which is why I had a chance to talk to Mary, because when the state-by-state numbers came out after the decennial, we did a state profile for every state, which meant little stories, a map, and so forth. So we're very good with that, and I love the beat. So why did I leave in 2013? Well, that's going to be a nice backdrop for our conversation. I left because the media landscape is changing dramatically. It was obvious that there was less and less interest in in-depth coverage, less interest in having beat reporters, because all of the shift was going to online, digital, which is quick. It's no longer a daily cycle or a weekly cycle or a monthly cycle. It's a minute-by-minute cycle. So the interest in deeper analysis was sort of thrown out the window. So I left, and then I ended up working for Al Jazeera America for a couple of years until they shuttered. So for all this time, I had been a Census user, and Census was very interested in bringing some of my perspective to the Bureau. So I was very lucky to join the Census Bureau. So I went from user to trying to make our content much more user-friendly, because I know what it's like to be on the outside. And just to give you another point about the media landscape changing, remember that I was covering demographics full-time for almost 20 years at USA Today. Do you know how many people now cover that beat at USA Today? Absolutely zero. So another factoid that will give you some food for thought, the American Society of News Editors, which every year had conducted a survey of journalism jobs in newsrooms across the country. This year, they're not going to do that anymore, and that's the first time in 40 years. 20,000 jobs, journalists have been put out of work since 2006 alone. And they've stopped doing the survey because they can no longer monitor the change, because a lot of the positions are no longer, they just disappeared. So now you're going to see newsroom positions filled with a lot of new titles, like online producer, online editor, social media strategist, video editor. Everything has changed. So the bottom line is that we can no longer count on media to translate our data and put it out to the general public, to small businesses, to community groups, to average citizens who are interested in knowing what's going on in their town or county. We just cannot count on that. They're just not going to do it. So what I'm trying to do for the Census Bureau is to help them do the work for and to fill the void that we're seeing happen in newsrooms across the country. And I'm applying a lot of my journalism skills, hopefully, to translating that. So I talked about this. I'm sorry, I'm going through my crib sheet here. Yes, what we need to do is almost do the work for them, which I know is a big challenge for the Census Bureau because we cannot play by the same rules as news organizations. We cannot rely on outside experts, at least not yet, because I'm working on that, to give their perspective. We are very skittish about using analysis that comes from outside the government because we want to put it to our test, you know, and make sure it's, and I think that that's going to have to change. If this is their analysis of census data, we stand by the data, they have to stand by their analysis. So I'm hoping we'll be able to do that. We want all types of users to access our data in easily digestible ways. And we must change. Having been a user of census data for years, I know how tough it is to find some of it. The search engine, I think, is horrible. If you search by topic even, you get very strange things. We've made progress in doing more maps and graphics. We have blogs, but I wonder how many people see those blogs because you have to subscribe to them. Like Random Samplings or Research Matters is filled with wonderful nuggets, but go find them. So that's what we have to change, and it's been sort of a challenge. So let's look at the market forces we face, which sort of play into what's happened to the media landscape and also why the census has to react and change the way it does things. Okay, right now more than 84% of American adults use the internet, and this is all according to Pew Research. That's up from about half in 2000, so that's a pretty huge increase. And even though older adults have lagged behind, now a majority of senior citizens use the internet. And also, what's really interesting to me is that even though the better educated and more affluent folks have a higher usage rate, the class-related gaps have shrunk dramatically in 15 years. And the most pronounced growth is happening among those in lower-income households. And in terms of racial and ethnic groups, we have 78% of blacks, 81% of Hispanics, 85% of whites, and 97% of English-speaking Asians using the internet. So basically, it's an overwhelming majority. Now, let's see how people get their news. Another Pew study shows that about 4 in 10 Americans get some of their news online. And that's nearly twice as many adults as those who get it from print. So they get it either from websites or apps or social media or both. And even though TV still dominates in terms of the news source for most Americans, we know what's going to happen as the young tech generation that sort of was born with a tablet and it's in their hands, you know. What will happen to that? It's going to be overwhelming. So I just wanted to take a quick informal poll here. How many of you still subscribe to a newspaper? That's pretty good. Print. Paper. How many of you buy newspapers at a newsstand? So that says that, oh, boy.
The New York Times every Sunday when we get here.
Well, but it's obvious what's going on. I mean, and I was commenting when I was at the hotel yesterday, and I saw your local paper, and I picked it up, and it was 2 sections, and the second one was a sports section, and I was like, wow, things have really changed, and that's true nationwide. And without the mainstays of the New York Times and Washington Post, I mean, locally, it's really been devastated, and USA Today even is sort of propping up its circulation by getting its local newspapers, because they own so many newspapers, to put in a butterfly edition of USA Today, sort of a shortened edition in there, which sort of helps their circulation numbers. But it's a struggle. All the focus is going to the website. Unfortunately, nobody has quite figured out how to make money off of websites. But we don't have to worry about that at the Census Bureau. So, obviously, like I said, the Census Bureau has been an online source of data for years, you know, with the mapping and the graphics and, of course, all of the spreadsheets that we have. But as I mentioned, it's not the easiest one to navigate, especially for general consumers. It really is not. So this is what we're doing to try to correct that. We've been working on what we call a content or story hub, which is going to look a lot like a news hub. So if you think of CNN.com or USAToday.com, this is what we're working towards. It's going to have, I wish I could show it to you, but it's still in prototype, but I can talk about it. It's going to have color images. So the front will be like tiles. It'll have a main picture at the front. It could be a map. It could be a graphic. It could be, if we're writing story about birth rate, it could be pictures of babies in a nursery. Because we know that people are drawn to images much more than just text. So this is what the plan is, and initially we had talked about doing it by topic. So we'd have an econ hub and maybe a population hub. And we decided that the process to get content through all the clearance levels at the Census Bureau would make it impossible for us to refresh the page much more than once a month. And that's not the goal. We need to be a little bit faster. So we're going to do a general hub that will cover probably about 12 topics. And each of them will have a tag, which is really going to help us, we hope, in getting more traffic and getting more attention with Google searches, and will also help people connect to content that we've had on the website for a long time that nobody could find, because we can do we can refer to things inside. So this is the really exciting plan that we're working on. Like I said, we're going to have 12 topics: population, economic, health, employment, families and living arrangements, and so on. And the goal is to refresh the page frequently. So we are even talking about maybe having an editor of that page to curate the content. And it could be a question of just moving things around, or pulling things from inside and putting something from the front, and and changing the images and so forth. So that's going to be really somewhat revolutionary for the Census Bureau, if you know what I mean. And we're dealing with some resistance from some corners. Gee, I wonder why. Yeah, I have a funny story somewhere that I'll tell you. I'll share with you later. But so I have personally been working with the POP division on one of the projects that will help launch this content hub. What we're doing is a package of stories, and I will call them stories because I like that term, and some people don't. Stories on what drives population change in this country. So we're going to do a main piece that discusses the components of change and what's happened and so forth, a big overview. And then we're doing pieces on each of the components, so birth, death, domestic migration, and immigration. And in each of them, we're taking different angles, and we're trying to write them as I would have done it for USA Today, or the way the New York Times writes them, to sort of tell a story. So that's been an interesting challenge as well, because I'm working with subject matter experts who are not used to really talking about the trends behind the numbers, and I really focused on the numbers. So what I've done is some of the steps that I've taken to help them sort of think differently is I've interviewed them to give them an idea of what questions would be interesting. Because I really want them to write it. I can't just come in and just go, I'm going to write it, you know. It's their work. They're very protective of it. And as a lot of people from the Census Bureau here know, everybody protects their turf, and they don't want me to come in and just take over their content. So that's fine by me, but it's taken a lot of coaching. So interviewing them has been a really good thing. I'm going to tell you some of the, yes, how do I make it easier for them? Another thing that I've done in terms of content, which will eventually end up in this hub, but right now goes into Random Samplings blog, is I've launched a Q&A format. A lot of people feel a lot more comfortable just answering questions, especially if you email them the questions so they can write them and think about them. And so I've done this with, for example, a blog we just did in honor of Grandparents' Day. We had done a facts for feature release, which is a typical X number of grandparents, which I find a little bit boring. And so I worked with a subject matter expert, and I said, can we look at like what's happening with by race and ethnicity? Are we seeing more non-Hispanic white grandparents living under the same roof as grandkids as their grandkids? And sure enough, we did. So I typed up questions, they wrote their answers, I paraphrased some of their answers, ran it by them again to make sure that it was accurate, and then we had to go, still, for just a blog that was probably about 5-6 inches, we had to go through the internal branch clearance process, then the PIO clearance process, and then Commerce Department clearance process. And all these steps are things that we're trying to simplify, but I'm just not sure how we're going to do that. It's driving me crazy.
How long did it take to get those 3 levels?
I'm ashamed to admit that it probably took about 5 weeks. Well, you know, I come from a different environment, so it's driving me nuts. I said, okay, my week has ended and I've accomplished nothing, but nobody seems to mind. So, so we'll keep going. I keep reminding him. I made the mistake during a meeting about this infamous petroleum infographic. I was telling Andy, that comes from the econ division, which is a little bit tough to deal with, that I started in May, on May 2nd, and they had already had several prototypes of this petroleum infographic they wanted to work on, and we're, September 14th? And they're still working on it. I've deleted every email I get that says petroleum infographic. It's a process, and I go, what's the point if we can't move faster?
I have a question. So in terms of, and maybe you spoke to this a little bit, and I just missed it, but so, I mean, it sounds like a very interesting idea in having some more user-friendly, you know, it's just sort of catchy kind of documents.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're going to have like interested in, like a link at the bottom, or interested in trends in your state, click here, so that you could then if you know somebody is more interested in like looking at the data, it would at least take them to a spot and continue to work with sort of this, what I'm guessing is the census goal of like making data more accessible to wider.
And I'll get to that. That's something we're also talking about that would involve the SDCs. There you go. Go power to the SDCs. I'll discuss that. And again, it's going to be a constant negotiation, which I've learned the hard way, because I came in all gung-ho and go, I have all these great ideas, and they all looked at me like, are you kidding? But it's working. The fact that they're bringing more people such as myself from the outside with an outside perspective, I think is really crucial. So again, it's going to be baby steps, but as long as we take them. We're crawling right now, but So anyway, this grandparents Q&A was thrilling for me because I actually got them to say it a little bit by prodding them, as I would have done as a reporter, to say, well, why do you think that more grandparents are living on the same road? Could it have an economic reason? Is it because more immigrants are accustomed to living in multi-generational households? And they actually wrote that, which was great. So I was very happy. It's a question of, giving more context to things than just factoids. So let's see. All right, so I've worked with the subject matter experts. Oh, by the way, the other thing we want to do with the Content Hub is we're also doing videos. We're doing, because some people like to consume information via videos. I don't always understand it, except for cat videos, but we have to do what we have to do. So we've worked with the SMEs, the subject matter experts that I'm dealing with on this population project, and we're doing 30-second to 60-second videos, so it's more like a nugget. So if somebody just wants to click on that, it's one of them talking about, yes, in a third of U.S. counties, there are more deaths than births, which is actually pretty scary, isn't it? Which is part of what we write about in the death thing. So we're going to do that, and that can be an element on the front to refer back into the text or the map or the graphic inside. So some of the tips that I've given the folks who are starting to write these stories is that please put the most interesting and newsworthy finding at the top. The first few, because I edit a lot of this and I work with them to rewrite it and so forth, which sometimes can take weeks, but the first batch of submissions that I got, the first paragraph would be the census data, the Census Bureau collects data on blah, 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 blah. And I said, that can be handled in a footnote. It can be deeper into the story. It's not necessary. You're telling the story not of how the census conducted the survey, but what the numbers show. I also advise them to always provide context by including historical trends. And I know there's some analysts who refuse to do that because it's not necessarily comparable, and we have to do a regression analysis to make sure that. And and I understand, but come on, if we're stepping back and talking about a 10-year or 20-year trend, we know what's happening on the ground, so we should be able to just say that. Rankings are also very good, and I think people love to look at that, how they fare in comparison. It's always good to say how you relate to other states, or when you're talking about birth rates among Hispanics, talk also about the birth rate in other groups, so people can make a comparison. And I often tell them, which I know is very tough to do for a lot of these experts at the Census Bureau, is I said, imagine your mom asking you, hey, are people still moving around the country a lot? Okay, maybe your mom wouldn't ask you that, but for the sake of argument, how would you tell her what's happening? This is really domestic migration, but how would you say it so somebody can understand it? So I say it's a really good exercise to sort of pull you out of the weeds, because most people don't think like Census Bureau researchers, and we want to tell them the story of America. That's the bottom line. We are the greatest collector of data, and sometimes we don't share our stories, and we wait for someone else to do it. And yes, Pew does a good job on various topics, and Brookings does a good job, which is why I think sometimes we should rely on letting them have a forum on maybe on our website. It's still on them, whatever their finding is, but it would help provide perspective that sometimes we don't feel comfortable providing. So, but there's a big argument about, well, Brookings is sort of left-leaning, and, then what are we going to do? They're going to call us political and so forth. We have to deal with that one way or the other. So the next step is going to be, which gets to your point, would be to reach out to our partners, both in communities and at state data centers. We think that publishing blogs or Q&As with people in various locations across the country is going to give us local and regional perspective that we can't always offer except in a spreadsheet. Just great insight. And I've already gotten a submission from the Minnesota SDC. It was a really good piece about what's going on in terms of people moving back into the heart of metropolitan areas. And there's some specifics to St. Paul and Minneapolis. And so we're working on it. The problem is that we're still battling coming up with a clearance process for any kind of outside submission. So I'm trying to get them and put them in front of people's faces. And I'm hoping that will push the process along. But that would give us a way to, as you suggested, put something on the Content Hub saying, maybe not so much if you want to know more about your state, but if we have a post from the Minnesota, a person learn about Minnesota, read about how the latest estimates, or what the latest estimates tell you about Minnesota, and so forth.
Plus, the State Data Center has their own clearinghouse website, so we could actually post stuff there as well.
There you go. There you go.
And refer back to your article, Haya.
So, what the great thing about the Content Hub in the future is that it's going to allow us to track the metrics of the StoryHub. We will know what's most popular, what people are clicking on, and we can in the future hopefully customize some of our content to the needs of users by geography and topic. And the other thing is that we can also customize our content to appeal to users in hard-to-count areas, which is going to be a great tool to improve non-response rates as we head toward the first online census in 2020. So that's something we're really thinking about. So it's not just telling stories, but it's like helping to bridge a gap with local communities and help us in all of our efforts. Now, I know that some worry that by doing this, we're getting away from our statistics gathering mission. I don't think anybody should worry about that. Everything that the census produces and has for decades will still be on the site. Nothing is changing there. And some of the more academic and technical users can choose to bypass this Content Hub and go directly to where they usually go if they're happy with it. But I can assure you that even academics and statisticians like to read about national trends and what's going on in parts of the country, you know. And so I think it will have a pretty broad appeal. But I know it's not a change, as I mentioned earlier, that's embraced by everyone. We are even having debates over the use of StoryHub, because some researchers and statisticians think it's a frivolous term. They say it undermines the seriousness of the research. I certainly don't view it that way, but they do. And they think that some people associate the term story with fiction, and God forbid we, you know, put the census data in a bad light. Now, I totally disagree with their view. I mean, some people suggested we should call it an articles hub. Exactly. You cringe. Thank you. My point exactly. So, I mean, we're telling the story of America. It's a story. It's not a falsehood. It's a story. It's a tale. So, anyway. So from there, we're going to go to talk about social media a little bit. We think that the StoryHub will help generate a lot more views, because the key with the StoryHub is that every one of the components will have a headline. And headlines are key to getting views and links and retweets and to move up high on the Google search, these keywords, which is why I'm sort of pushing for people to start thinking about search engine optimization, which everybody knows about, is, you know, the SEO. So I think once we have these headlines that force you to think about how to do something catchy, you know, get people's attention. The goal is to get people to read and look at everything that accompanies this. And how do you get their attention? Well, like I say, a combination of video, images, and good, strong headlines that I think will also help the content below the headline. Because it's very tough to write a headline if you don't stop and think, what are we saying, you know, with this story. Yeah, the use of news-inspired headlines, tags.
Haya, on that
Yeah.
point, is there going to be any effort, maybe this is down the road, to put some paid, maybe search keyword terms for each story or anything like that, or is this purely going to be organic?
It's going to be organic.
Purely organic.
We actually already are.
Oh, you are doing it?
Terms to pop to the top of Google searches.
I didn't even know.
It's frustrating when you go to your iPhone and ask Siri what's the population of, you know, Helena, Montana, and you get an answer from Wikipedia,
Right.
not from the Census Bureau. So we're actually now paying
What?
to have it.
When did that start?
Probably a couple of months ago.
Oh, that's why I didn't know about it.
Yeah.
Well, you know we don't talk to each other in the Census Bureau. So we need to communicate, so.
That's a
Government
cheap-
relations over
yeah.
here and marketing on the other side. From your example is the same thing here.
Right, right.
But that's a cheap, kind of off the ground way to
It's
throw
such
a
an
couple
easy
$100
way.
at it, and you know your organic reach is going to be a little.
Yeah, but I just think that, I mean, even looking at, I mean, PIO, which is part of the COM directorate, has done a much better job writing their press releases. I remember getting the press releases when I was a reporter and going, there's nothing I can use in here, you know? But, you know, we have to keep in mind that if you tweet,
You got a question, huh?
oh, I'm
I was
sorry.
just going to say it's interesting you bring the Wikipedia because their demographics are computer written from the census. It's
Yeah.
not even
I
what
know.
we're looking at. Computer
Yes.
grabs that and
And actually, if you go into Wikipedia, it links to Census.
Well, and that's been a real challenge too, is a lot of third-party organizations that are repurposing Census Bureau data are not then citing the Census Bureau as a source. We fight all the time with Congress saying, why should I pay you guys all this money to do this when I can just go get that data from? And they're like, hello, you know, that data, that data
Would not exist if,
they're getting it from us, and they're not telling you that they're getting it from us. So the whole citing and sourcing is,
Right.
we are pushing the envelope on that a lot more to make sure that that's happening. Yeah.
We have the same issue here
But-
at the state.
Absolutely,
Geographic
totally.
data.
sure.
Yep.
Do you ever hear comments, and we get this occasionally at the Department of Labor, but like you're taking away work from those newspaper articles that are trying to make a living doing this stuff, and then you're producing it for free. Like we get that comment with a lot of our reports.
Really?
That you could have paid a private consulting company $50,000 and you just lost them $50,000.
Well, too bad. I mean, I'm sorry. You know, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not worried about that. Everybody is fighting for an audience, but I think our purpose is so valuable, you know.
Actually, I will tell you on the tool that I'm going to show you guys this afternoon, we actually have gotten that specific comment, and the answer I always give is, if a third-party company is taking our data and redisseminating it and adding no value to it,
Right.
then shame on them and shame on us
Right.
for not meeting that user's needs by delivering the data in a way that you can consume it. However, if they are doing something with it that we can't or won't do, for example, there's only one program at Census that does projections, population projections. The business data, there isn't a single program that projects our data out 5 years, 10 years, 15 years out. Not a single one. If someone's taking our data and doing some crazy statistics and projecting it out, more power to them. So when I've gotten that comment from people about Census Business Builder, I'm like, if you don't like what we've done, then do something that we can't or won't do, and then I'm going to pat you on the back and say, fabulous, that's exactly what you should be doing. But it's our failure when we aren't delivering the content in a way that people can consume.
Yeah.
And it's our responsibility to fix that.
Right, and I think that's the same sort of comments that we've seen at the Department of Labor. We've been trying to create an easier way for people to consume the information.
Yeah, and I frankly,
It is partly our are bad for not producing it.
Right. And I frankly think that if we start producing this content, we're going to make a lot of people's lives a lot easier because they can do whatever they want with it. They can take it, they can make a couple of calls to their local chamber of commerce or whatever and localize it. That we've given them the story idea, we've given them sort of the foundation for the story.
And accurate data.
And accurate data. So I think more power to them, you know, if they take it and use it, I think most of them would welcome it, frankly.
But
So.
who is the audience? I mean, it seems like Census is a little unclear about who the audience for their data and how you reach it. I mean, facts for features, that was clear that the audience was journalists. They were going out to the media. And now that isn't how news happens anymore, as you were saying. You know, we're going directly to people, but who is that directly to people? Because the only thing that Census has a mandate to do is to, in the Constitution, to count the population of the country, all of them. You don't have a mandate to do anything else, or do you?
We do.
Who is your audience?
So I think I've been in Census for a long time, and we've gone through directors who truly believe that our responsibility was just to dump raw numbers on the street and let other people digest them. That wasn't our true mission or responsibility to do that. Our current management, our current director and deputy director, I think very much believe that that's not sufficient. That way of disseminating data was meeting the needs of about 5 to 10% of our users. But what we've discovered is that there's another 90% of our users that are consuming census data, may not even realize that they are, because they're getting it from somebody else, and we've got to do a better job of getting the data to them. And that means tailoring the dissemination vehicles to the audience. One of the comments I was going to make to you all in terms of your role in making all this happen is we think we know who uses our data and how they use it. And sometimes we're right. Sometimes the real nerdies, you know, Target uses our data to decide where to locate Target stores. Fabulous. But we need to hear from you guys through Mary what the other use cases are, because until we hear those real-life use cases, like there's still these stories that I'm telling you about the guy opening, you know, with the 5 restaurants and adding a drive-in window, until we hear that, our demographic programs only think that there's demographic uses of their demographic data. Our business people think there's only economic uses. The issue, in Census Business Builder, I have population per establishment. That's how many people does every business in that industry serve? That sounds like such a simple number. It's a great statistic for you all to use, and yet merging those two numbers across 2 program areas was like, they need to get special dispensation from the Pope. We don't believe, but we heard the use case of, I need to know, when I want to open a business, I need to know how many people would my business potentially serve, and is this location versus this location better? We need to hear those stories from you all, because that will then influence what we put on the content hub. And it's the willingness to listen.
And I'm going to say something crazy doing this. It's like if you're not clear who your market is, it's like this is just.
I know you have to know your audience, but I think the way I look at it, and I'm sure there are different thoughts in every corner of the Census Bureau about this, but I think that this should be a more general audience hub, which, again, will help lead people who want a more detailed tier of data inside. It's all there. It's just to draw people who wouldn't know how to find the other data we have, or is put off by it because, you know, I mean, even American Fact Finder is not easy for a lot of people to navigate, as we know. So let me just tell you, in terms of census.gov, I managed to get some stats. We get roughly 47 million visits a year. 2/3 of the visitors are first-time visitors, which was really stunning to me. The share from mobile devices is now at about 20%, and it has risen steadily from 7% in 2012, but I think it's still really low. And what are the most popular components? Andy will be very happy to hear this, NAICS is #1, and then it's Quick Facts, and then it's American Fact Finder. Those are the primary content destinations, but I think the hub could help pull a lot more people into census.gov. That's my hope anyway. So we want to do better. We need to do better. I keep reminding people of that. We have to stop just thinking that our mission is solely to collect the data. It's also to share it. We need to share it with users. And the bottom line is that it could be really fun. You know, people forget that. And I have to say that I see some of the subject matter experts who are now working with me on this being excited about it. They're really excited. It's the first time somebody asks them what they really think, you know, what is going on, to analyze it a bit. And it also gives them a platform. Their names will be up there. They'll have a byline with it. They'll have videos of them talking about it. And I think that's really good. That's really crucial. And I think it will make them much more comfortable also in dealing with the media when they call and ask for interviews, because right now it's a very restrictive process. There are only a few people who are allowed to do it. So anyway, that's the overview of the digital landscape, and I hope I provided you with some useful tips. And if you have any other questions, please ask me.
So I will talk just real briefly about something that I see as really useful in that same vein of the audience question, and that is the State Data Center Network actually has 48 state data centers in every state. We also have a sister network called the CEIC's, I forget what CEIC stands for.
Census Information Center.
Thank you, Census Information Center. That specializes on certain population groups, such as Hispanic or American Indian or those groups. And I really think that in partnership with the Census Bureau, part of the, hopefully, where we will get is to take these stories that now Haya can better present from the Census Bureau in a way and then bring them back down to the level of Montana. Because I'm telling you right now, we're at a huge disadvantage. We're at a huge disadvantage partly because we have one congressional district. By 2050, I read a statistic a while back that said, 7 states are going to dominate the House of Representatives. 7 states. In order for us, when it comes to funding and things about Montana, we're going to have to figure it out. We're going to have to figure out how we can localize those stories so that we can educate Montanans, we can educate our Congress associate, all these people so that we can make it the Montana story, and how does that play out here. And as an aging state, as a state that's, a rural state, as a state that doesn't have as many infrastructure abilities, we really need to figure it out. So I'm excited to work with Haya. As a member of the SBC steering committee, I know that my other states, the other 9 of us, are all interested in this. The CEICs are interested in what we can do to help influence what the Bureau is doing. But at least having the Bureau actually recognize now that they're not just data disseminators. When I came to work here, they just thought of themselves as data disseminators. I mean, this is a huge difference. First time I've really ever heard them talking about putting things in context.
Yeah, and it's a big cultural revolution too. But I think we're benefiting from the fact that there are also a lot of younger people joining the Census Bureau. There are 20-something analysts who have a little bit of a different perspective, and so I think the change is hopeful. And my ultimate goal will be to do a state-by-state feature, which could include Q&As with Mary, for example, about Montana, or people, anybody in this room. Exactly. I mean, or just doing infographic on the state. I mean, just to constantly to reach out to everyone out there. And of course, I've been so trained to think that way because of USA Today. We were obsessed with 50 states. Every time I did a story, I had to make sure I got a comment from the Midwest and one from the West, and so and just so you know, and I have business cards that I can give you later, but I'm based in Los Angeles in California, and by the way, I don't have a perm. For those who missed Andy's talk, this won't make any sense. But anyway, I'm based in LA and I work from home most of the time, but I go back to Suitland so far every month for about a week. So I do a lot of shuttling back and forth, but it's been great, you know, to work from home, but it's been also challenging because there are so many meetings that I have to call in on, and I have no idea who's talking, you know, during those meetings. But I'm getting used to it.
Anybody? I didn't want
Yeah.
to
One
interrupt.
thing I'll just say, 2 points. One, I love your blunt pessimism and your hopefully persevering optimism on changing some of the issues you brought up, because I have almost all of those. It is really frustrating a lot of times trying to use information in a meaningful or applied way, and seemingly the Census Bureau doesn't really give a crap. And this is historic, and this is what, Andy, you've been talking about and what you're bringing up. It's really great as a user to see these perspectives. I know Census Bureau is huge, and it's going to take a long time, but
We're scared to tell the story, and we're
Right.
scared to answer the question why.
Right.
Our data, we just disseminate numbers and we don't answer why that thing happened.
exactly.
If our data doesn't support the why, we don't want to say the why, even though our own knowledge and research might actually lead to the why.
So that's to my second point, and this is why economists are better than statisticians. Statisticians don't care why. They
Right.
think about context, and I apologize, but economists.
Did you just insult half the room, or?
But economists, that's the differentiator between economics, or econometrics and statistics, is it's applied.
Well, we're trying to get the economist and the econ division to be a little bit more forthcoming, but that's not easy either. You know,
It's a perspective and training, and so
Yeah.
that's really hard.
It's like I remember, I mean, there are so many restrictions that are applied by the government. For example, when I wanted to do, I started looking at spreadsheets on new housing construction. And I know housing is always something that people are interested in reading about. And I started looking at the numbers, and it looks like homes are getting bigger, continue to get bigger. Of course, the ideal would have been to look at what's happened to average family size in comparison with that, but God forbid we would compare the two. So I stuck with housing, but there was a lot of concern because this is collected by the Census Bureau, but for HUD. So everything had to go through HUD. And you're talking about just the houses are getting bigger. You know, there are more houses with 3 or more car garages, and there are more houses with 4 or more bathrooms, whatever. It's just a fact. And it was just an absolute nightmare, which can be discouraging. Sometimes you say, well, why should I bother trying? But I'm stubborn, so
Yeah, call us up, we'll encourage you.
there you go. There you go.
Thank you, Haya.
Thank you very much.